What is up, Ivy Leaguers? Let's talk sports. It is a great day. We've got a lot to cover today. Quick episode though. We're gonna give a recap for the past couple college football seasons, and then we're gonna talk about the big game, the only games that I'm paying attention to this weekend: Alabama versus Georgia. All right, let's get right into it. So the past couple of weeks have been very telling for college football. Um, you know, First couple of weeks, you can see who's the pretenders and who are the actual teams. Now we're really going to see that in the next coming weeks, but still, some very surprising teams that you may have thought, oh, they'd be better or they'd be worse. And one team I think we should talk about real quickly, not very much, but Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's kind of the joke of the SEC usually. They've been pretty good. They beat Virginia Tech, in their first game, and then they barely lost to Missouri last week. I mean, they missed a game tying field goal in overtime. I mean, that's how close it was. It was crazy. I mean, I thought they were going to pull it out, but can't win them all. But so Vanderbilt's definitely a team that we're seeing kind of emerge as this. Not. I'm not saying that they're going to make the playoffs because they're not. They don't have the talent level to do that, but they're a team that could compete for a good bowl game. Whereas in the previous couple of years, they've been a team that barely wins 3 games. So that's just something. It's an interesting headline. In other news, obviously we're going to talk about the Georgia Alabama game coming up this weekend. But Georgia almost lost to Kentucky. I mean, they were 1 point. They beat Kentucky by 1 point 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, that was no cakewalk. Sorry, I'm pulling up my scores here. That was no cakewalk for Georgia. So, I mean, that's something that you got to look at, especially because it was at Kentucky, and now they're traveling to Tuscaloosa, which is a much harder place to play than Kentucky. So, we'll see. Alabama, they had a scare against USF. I was at that game. Dedicated the field to Nick Saban, and USF, I mean, they hung in there for most of that game. Now, the final score was like 48-13 or something like that, but for most of that game, it was like 14-13. So, Alabama had their issues, but then they rebounded against at Wisconsin. They played at Wisconsin 2 weeks ago, and they dominated a solid 42-10 on the road at Wisconsin, which is a very tough place to play. It's a very historic team, very tough place to play in, and Bama showed that they could play. I mean, they really dominated that entire game, and their offensive line was awesome. I mean, it was incredible. And their offensive line is finally healthy because against USF and against Western Kentucky in their first 2 games, their offensive line, first off, had a bunch of penalties and also was not fully healthy. Caden Proctor is finally back, and that definitely helped bring this offensive line together. So I think their offensive line is finally what we thought it would be, which is arguably a top 5 offensive line in college football, if not a top 3. So Bama's definitely looking good. Michigan got beat by Texas in week 2, and that was not pretty for Michigan. But then, bless you, excuse me. But then in this past week they played USC, not South Carolina, USC, University of Southern California, which everyone thought could be a game that they might lose because USC's been pretty good this season, looking really good, and it came down to the wire. So, but Michigan pulled it out in the end. So Michigan only 1 loss, but they have not looked great all season. So I think if you're a Michigan fan, you have to realize, look, Jim Harbaugh's gone. It's going to take a minute for this Michigan team to rebound. Plus, they're playing with allegations. I mean, let's be honest. If you're not a Michigan fan, you're pretty salty towards Michigan because you know that they've been accused of cheating and they've been caught of cheating. It's not like it's random accusations. They have been caught. So Michigan definitely is going to need a couple years to rebound. They've got a tough schedule this season, and they're going to have to fight through it. I'm not saying they're not going to do well, but they're going to have to fight. they're really going to have to fight. But in other words, another Big Ten school is playing very good. Ohio State, rival of Michigan, is on fire. They look very, very good. They've just got playmakers all around. Quinshon Judkins, Trevion Henderson. They're good. They're going to be a really good team, a really hard team to beat this year. And another team that's going to be really hard to beat this year is Texas. Texas looks amazing. Now, the big headline coming out of Texas is that Quinn Ewers, he suffered like some kind of injury in his chest middle area. So, 2 weeks ago, I think. And so Arch Manning came in, won the game, and then last week Arch Manning started and played awesome. I mean, Arch Manning was on fire. You would have thought that it was Eli Manning or Peyton Manning out there in their primes. It was very cool to watch. And it's not just his arm that was impressive. It was his legs. He could scramble. He ran like crazy. So I mean, it was really impressive. And I talked about it on this podcast when everyone was recruiting Arch Manning. And I was a doubter. I'm not gonna lie. I doubted Arch Manning's skill because I believed that if his name wasn't Manning, if his last name was not Manning, I didn't think he would be a 5-star recruit or whatever he was. But he's proved me wrong. He's played good in these past 2 games. Now, mind you, he's not playing Alabama or Georgia or Oklahoma or whoever. He's playing, UL Monroe. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I don't know when Quinn Ewers will be back. But if Arch Manning is thrown into the fire in a game like even against Oklahoma, that's going to be really interesting to see. But anyways, let's move on to the game that we all want to talk about. The game we all want to hear. The probably top regular season game we've seen in probably 3 or 4 years at least. Alabama versus Georgia. Georgia traveling to Tuscaloosa. Going to go to this stadium right here. Right there. That stadium. Which is now named Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. I just wanted to point that out. I was there for the ceremony. It was very cool. Got a high five from Nick Saban. I'm not bragging. But yeah. So Georgia traveling to Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa at night. It's going to be nuts. In Georgia, what's interesting is Georgia's a 2.5-point favorite. That's the first time that it's at Alabama. Remember this. It's the first time Alabama has not been favored in a home game since, what was it? I think 2007. So Saban's first year. That's crazy to me. And also I think that it shows, 1, how dominant Nick Saban was, and 2, how much doubt there is around this Alabama football team. I think we're going to learn a lot about both Georgia and a lot about Alabama in this game, because Georgia has a lot of question marks off the field. All right, we've seen all the arrests. All right, it's now up to 26 or 27 of their players have been charged with a reckless driving or DUI or driving under the all this stuff. So we know all that off the field stuff about Georgia. We know all this stuff about Alabama, how they've got a new coach. We know all of that. What we want to know is how they play on the field. And this is going to be the first. I know Alabama kind of had a test against Wisconsin. Wisconsin didn't play awesome. And Georgia certainly had a test against Kentucky because, they willed their way to that one. They barely won that one. So that's what I look at. This is the first big game for both these teams. This is the first game. This is playoff implications. That's simple to put it. This game is a playoff game. It's an SEC championship game. I should know this stat off the top of my head, but I don't. How many of the last 10 SEC championship games have been Alabama versus Georgia? It's probably at least 5. At least. Which is incredible to me. But this game is going to be nuts. And this is what it's going to come down to me. Can Alabama's offensive line play like they did against Wisconsin? Can they be physical? Can they push those big Georgia guys around? And if they can, they win the game. I think it's as simple as that. But if Georgia can consistently put pressure on Milroe, and I'm not talking they have to blitz every play. I'm not saying that, but they have to consistently make Jalen Milroe feel pressure, and that's where we've seen Jalen Milroe falter a little when he's constantly pressured. Now, Georgia also has to stop the run. If they can't stop the run against Alabama, they're in big trouble. But I think now I'm gonna say this. I'm biased in this game. Y'all know I'm biased talking about this game. Everyone on the earth knows I'm biased talking about this game. Like I said, I think it's gonna come down to, can Alabama's offensive line be physical and push Georgia around? Because if they can, there's, I think, no question to me that they win the game. And also, I'd like to see if Alabama's defense can attack Georgia's. Well, if they can make Carson Beck. We saw against Kentucky, Carson Beck played a very bad game against Kentucky. It wasn't the Carson Beck that you're used to seeing. It's not the Heisman contender Carson Beck. It was the Carson Beck that looked like a deer in headlights, which isn't normal for him. I mean, really isn't. We didn't, even in the SEC championship last year against Alabama, which they lost, Carson Beck didn't look that rattled. But against Kentucky, he looked very rattled. So it was just something kind of unreal. But if he looks that rattled like he did against Kentucky in the Alabama game, I don't see how they pull away. Because, Georgia versus Kentucky, Georgia has more talented players. And eventually, that talent is going to show. I'm not saying that Kentucky couldn't win that game, because they very much could have. I think they made a poor coaching decision to not go for it on fourth down, give Georgia the ball back, and Georgia just ran the clock out. That's on the coach, I think. But I think Georgia's talent in that game proved. But in the Alabama game, Georgia and Alabama pretty much have the exact same talent level. I mean, 5 stars all around, 4 stars, 4.5 stars all around. There is no clear, Georgia has this much talent and Alabama has this much talent. No, it's like here. Georgia has the same amount of talent as Alabama. Now, where people say Georgia has the edge is in the coaching staff, but even then, I think Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. I heard him speak. I got to go to a Crimson kickoff thing in Tuscaloosa when I went for the Alabama USF game. I heard him speak, and I heard him get to analyze a couple of plays. It was awesome. Very cool. And he knows football so well. He knows it incredibly well. And so I think that, and it's also interesting to me, you got an offensive coordinator and Kalen DeBoer. You've got a very offensive-minded coach. And then you got Kirby Smart, who's a defensive-minded coach. It's the perfect matchup. And, like I said, I'm biased. But it is literally the perfect matchup for college football. You got the defensive-minded coach, offensive-minded coach, equal talent. It's a night game in the best atmosphere in college football, in my opinion. It's going to be nuts. The key, like I said, and I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to wrap it up here in the next minute or so. The keys to the game are the offense and defensive line for both Alabama and Georgia. All right? If Alabama can bully the Georgia defensive line, and if Alabama can bully the Georgia offensive line, Alabama wins the game easy. I always say, games are won and lost in the trenches. But first off, for Georgia, the keys to the game is Carson Beck. Keep Carson Beck calm. If he makes a mistake, all right, you got to say, forget the mistake. Lock in on the next play. Focus on the next play. That's what Carson Beck has to do. That's the big key to the game for Georgia. Also, the big key to the game is stopping Alabama's run game. If they can stop Alabama's run game, Georgia they'll benefit off of that. But if they can't stop Alabama's run game, they're in a lot of trouble. And the keys to the game for Alabama, keep Milroe protected. If Milroe is under constant pressure, he's going to get in trouble. We saw that in the Michigan game last year in the Rose Bowl. Milroe was constantly under pressure. He could never think, and they lost. They got beaten that game. So they have to keep Milroe unpressured. They have to let Milroe say, all right, I'm going to go through my reads or I'm going to run. But if Milroe, all of a sudden, if Milroe's pressured, he says, I'm going to go through my reads. Oh no, I'm sacked. That's the issue. So they have to do that, and they also have to bully Georgia. They just have to play bully ball. They have got to out-bully Georgia. Beat them in the trenches. Pound the run game. If you pound the run game, Alabama, and it's been annoying the past couple of years with some of the play callers, they haven't ran the ball like they used to, which you can argue it's a different game of college football. But it used to be that Alabama would just boom, boom. They would run the ball up the middle every play, and they'd always get at least 3 or 4 yards. But they just haven't ran the ball as much. And I think this year you see a potential to do that. And I think if they do that and they do it successfully, I think they could win the national championship. Nonetheless, I think they could win this game. So my score prediction, I'm going to give you my score prediction and then I'm going to be done. I'm going to say 35 Alabama to 31 for Georgia. I think that's going to be the final score. I think Alabama, home field advantage. I think the Link mentality. I think Alabama wins in a thriller. And this is going to be a crazy game. You're going to have to check out my Instagram because I'm going to be posting on it all game long. It's going to be nuts. I think we're just going to wrap it up here. I'm Ivy Taylor, signing off. Check it out. Hit that like and subscribe button. Check me out on Instagram. It's the same account, Ivy League Sports Podcast. Until next time, see ya.